Welcome to Shankism. This is episode 7, China. So on your papers, go ahead and write China, obviously, at the top. And also write the years, just to give you an idea of exactly the time frame we're talking about here, 2000 BC, so before Christ, and 220 AD, meaning Anno Domini. All right, so let's talk about China's geography. You want to write these geographic features down. So you have, to the north, you have the Gobi Desert. You want to write that down, so you can maybe put an N like we did before. Taklamakan Desert, that's more towards the northwest. The Himalayas are to the southwest. Again, SH will help you. We talked about the Himalayas when we talked about India. You don't have to put down thick forests. It's entirely up to you if you want to. But they are kind of surrounded by deserts and thick forests and mountain ranges, right? You have the Pacific Ocean, the East China Sea, and you have South China Sea here. There are 3 main rivers. The 3 main rivers, you definitely have to write these down because this is the last of the river valley civilizations that we are talking about. The first one here is the Honghe, which is known as the Yellow River, and that's located in northeast China. And again, you could just put NE to help you out, and I'll show you a picture of this so you can better visualize it. The Yangtze River, it's the middle river on the eastern side of China, Yangtze. And the bottom one here, the southernmost river that we're going to talk about is the Ji River. It's the bottom river, southern part. Let me show you what I'm talking about here. At the northernmost, so kind of at the top of the map here, you have the Yellow River. The Yellow River, right? It's about 3,395 miles long, and it's going to be running from the west and flowing into the Yellow Sea here. Yellow Sea, Yellow River. You'll understand why in a second, why they call it these different colors for river or a sea. And you probably have heard of Beijing, right? You probably have heard of Shanghai, and these are all located on these coastlines, near the coastlines, and very close to these rivers as well. You have down here 3,912 miles long. You have the Yangtze River, Yangtze, and you have the very bottom here, southernmost, 1,216 miles, the Ji River, the Ji River. So if you look at this is Loess. And what Loess is, it deposits huge amounts of yellowish silt when it overflows its banks. So think of it as this yellowish dirt. And it's when it overflows and flows too much, it's going to flood the river. It's going to flood the ocean or the sea that's there. Hence why they named these the Yellow River, the Yellow Sea. That's Loess. Write that down. This map is a very general map. You can understand that India we just studied is to the west, but it's blocked off by the Himalayas, right? We know this. The largest mountain range in the world, the highest peak in the world, Mount Everest, right? And China, more specifically, I want you to show here, I want you to write these down. You have the Sea of Japan to its east. You have the Yellow Sea, obviously where the Yellow River would be overflowing, and the East China Sea. These are some of the seas that are nearby and on the eastern side here. Another desert, the 5th largest desert you would write down as well, is the Gobi Desert. That's also, like I said, it's in the north there. But let's talk about dynasties, and I'll kind of explain real quickly what a dynasty is. Basically, it is a ruling family. So if I'm the king or I'm the emperor, if I die, typically my oldest son takes over, right? And then once he dies, his oldest son. So we have this family rule, right? And it won't be the same family rule dynasty the entire time. It will change for a variety of reasons that you'll see here very shortly. So write down the first one here, the Shang dynasty, from 1766 BC to 1122 BC. You've got about a 644 year range here. Right? America's only been around 244 years. Shang Dynasty was over 200 more years, basically 200 years more than that. And what this map is showing you, so you can kind of better understand this, You can see the outline of the Chinese chicken here. And I say that because the current country, the current boundaries looks like a chicken, right? And what the Shang dynasty had at that point was just this little, I don't say just this little portion, it's a huge portion. China's huge, but it's significantly less than what the main country of China has today. This would be Mongolia up there. We'll talk about that in the next episode. Okay? But let's see what they're known for. So you want to write these down. This is about the Shang dynasty. They're the first to use a Chinese script. Anytime I say script, it really just means some form of writing. Think of like a description. Can you describe that for me? And they're called oracle bones, and I'm going to show you what each of these are here in a second. There's bronze casting, carving jade, Chinese calendar, and walled Chinese cities. Kind of the first walled Chinese cities, not the Great Wall really. So we're talking about now. We're talking about just walled cities in itself. So let's look and see what I'm talking about first. Go to bronze casting. So they are basically making a mold of something. Let's say maybe it's like an arrow, right? And I pour that bronze in. I'm going to make the same exact casting every single time, right? Maybe think of it like you break your arm and you have a cast. If I put a cast on there every time, it's going to be the exact same cast every time, right? Because your arm is the same. Well, if you imprint it in there, you're going to have that same arrowhead or that same maybe sword or spear or whatever it may be. Okay. Jade, a jewel that they were able to construct, this kind of greenish, almost like Thanos style jewel. That's what jade is. You probably have seen it. Maybe you have some jade jewel. It might help you remember it. The Chinese calendar, they have the year of, or the month of, year of the chicken, or year of the monkey, year of the horse, snake, dragon, all those different things you may have. And they go by a different calendar than we do. Different year, different months, and so forth. So you might see it on a calendar, and it might have like a completely different day. They don't celebrate the new year on January 1st, right? They celebrate the new year on... Let's go back to oracle bones, because this is a definite important thing here, because this is their first script. This is their first written language that we have. It's simplistic, but it's something, right? And you want to write down oracle bones are the earliest writings. Now, when you hear oracle, you want to think of like somebody that can like speak with the gods, right? And you'll see this in Greece, you'll see this, and obviously here in China. If you ever seen the Matrix, there is an oracle, the first Matrix, there's an oracle they talk to, like basically somebody that can talk with the divine, the entities. And this happens between 1250 and 1192 BC, roughly is when we find a lot of these oracle bones. Well, as you may look and see, they're like on turtle shells, right? And they're writing on turtle shells. They're kind of carving into turtle shells. Now, what are they carving into? Right? Were they just randomly doodling? Well, as you can see, these Chinese calligraphy here, that they're going to be asking questions, okay? And whatever these oracles are asking, what's the meaning of life? All right, let's write it down on this turtle shell. Most times on turtle shell, but it's other times obviously bones. And they'll leave it over this Chinese script. They'll leave it over a fire, and as the turtle shell breaks and cracks, well, they're not going to just throw it directly on. Probably they're going to leave it over it so the turtle shell kind of cracks, and how it cracks on their questions, and the oracles will pick it up. They'll look at it and they'll say, "Hey, you know what? The gods are saying this, this, and this. I can tell." How can they tell? We don't know. Maybe they're making up. Who knows? But that's what the whole purpose of this was. That's oracle bones. That's the Shang dynasty. So all of that from the Shang dynasty, you've got to remember. All right, just a real quick on Chinese society. You see the different levels here, merchants and soldiers and artisans, and as you work up, even peasants are more in the middle, right? They're pretty important because in Chinese society, if you don't have food, you don't live. No one does, right? So they're deemed pretty important. Soldiers are down lower. We saw in ancient India, the Kshatriyas, they were basically one step above, or one step almost to the Brahmin level, where it would be the highest level. But you got state officials above them, and nobles and scholars. And kings and governors, and at the top you'll have an emperor, and you'll see the emperor that I'm talking about here soon. Next, you had the Zhao dynasty from 1222 to 256 BC. So you have a 1,000-year period of the Zhou or the Zhao dynasty, or Chao dynasty, and that's roughly 1,000 years, almost 1,000 years, right? And what the Zhao improvements did in that 1,000 years, not only did they take the things from the Shang dynasty, but they built roads, they built canals, and they used coin money, right? And we already know the Lydians were the first people to use coin money, but the Zhao are using coin money, so it looks something like this, right? And if we were in class, in person, I would show you that I actually have one of these, and I could personally show you and could pass around the class, but unfortunately, we are not there. You saw they ruled for about 1,000 years, and there's 1,000 years of relative peace. But really coming to power in the first place, there's this idea of mandate of heaven. Now, let's break this apart. What's a mandate? You want to write down a mandate is an official order. So you may have seen in the news that governors and so forth today are giving out statewide mandates, right? You know, whether it be stay in your home or wear a mask or whatever it may be. That's a mandate, right? It's an official order coming down from a higher power of the government. I'm not talking about religious power. Well, in this case, I kind of am. But it's an official order. Okay. The other portion of that, it is the ruler has divine approval. So you want to write that down. And what I mean by divine approval, the gods approve the current dynasty and everyone in it, and obviously including the emperor at the top of it. So to look at it, think of like the gods sitting up there. And you know, the main Chinese god here, Shangdi, says, "You rule because I said so." All right. You have the mandate of heaven. I give you this official order. It's not an actual like piece of paper or anything like that. Okay. No one can kind of say, "I have the mandate right here." You'll understand how people know whether or not you have the mandate, whether or not the gods are forever in your favor, right? Because this is going to be a whole entire cycle. So from the mandate of heaven, let's say that the Zhao dynasty does have it. You need to write this down. This is a dynastic circle, right? Same thing here. And I would put, just as I have it, so you can kind of, you have plenty of paper, right? You have all the time and the paper in the world, right? You know, however long this takes, you can pause it and you can write it down. The first step here, a strong dynasty establishes peace. So you have a dynasty like the Zhao dynasty will establish peace. Maybe it's a warring time, they establish peace. Everyone, the peasants, the people, they're all like, hey, this dynasty, this emperor must have the mandate of heaven because it's peaceful. It's a good time. This is our golden age, right? Or, you know, we're going through a golden age time. So everyone's like, cool, they must have it. In time, and it could be 200 years, could be a dynasty, or sorry, it could be, you know, a generation, could be 1,000 years, who knows, right? It just depends. In time, the dynasty declines. So if you have weak rulers or they're taking advantage of the people, whatever it may be, their power will go down and grow weaker, and people will notice this. They're like, no, that Zhao dynasty isn't as strong as it used to be. You know, I don't have a lot of money in my pocket. We're constantly at war with each other or other countries, and there's not a lot of building projects. What's going on here? Did they lose the mandate of heaven? Are the gods no longer in the Zhao's favor? The old dynasty, this is the next step, this is the next cycle here, is seen as having lost the mandate of heaven. So they no longer have it. And the thing is, you can't show it, hey, here's the paper, I still have it, they signed it, you know, forever. That's not how that works. This is until the people decide that, hey, he doesn't have it. If he did have it, the gods were still in their favor, we wouldn't be in this decline. That means the rebellion is justified, meaning we can rebel. It's okay to rebel, right? Because he must have lost it. You can't prove it, though. The only way you can prove it is with the empire declining. Another dynasty, that current dynasty is overthrown through rebellion. So somebody probably through the ranks here, maybe it's the peasant class or higher up, noble or whatever, gathers the people behind them and says, hey, and you can just make this up pretty much, I have the mandate of heaven. Follow me and we will overthrow the current dynasty. and a new dynasty will merge. So if I'm the Shang dynasty and I'm like a noble, we'll say, and sometimes it was peasants, and I say, hey, the Zhao Empire, the Zhao dynasty, they're terrible, they're horrible, we're in the worst place we've ever been. They've lost the mandate of heaven. Follow me, and we will win. And they'll fight that current dynasty. They'll go through a war, essentially. And if the Shang dynasty comes out on top, hey, guess what? I have the mandate of heaven. I can't prove it. I don't have a piece of paper for it, obviously, but people would believe it. The new dynasty, the Shang dynasty, gains more and restores peace. So once I restore peace, that's when everyone, and I'll claim, hey, I have it. I have the mandate of heaven. Everyone's like, I guess he does. He must, because otherwise he would have lost the war. That's the dynastic cycle. All right, this whole cycle of people losing the mandate of heaven and gaining the mandate of heaven. It's not an actual piece of paper, right? You basically just claim it, and if you win, you must have it. You lose, you must not have it. So they go through this warring states period, all right? And you want to write down here that Qin Shi Huangdi, or Qin Shi Huangdi, however you want to pronounce it, 260 BC and 210 BC, 50-year period, he will live and he will rule in a shorter amount of time. But he will be one of the more influential, probably one of the most famous emperors. Now, obviously they're not going by BC. We've talked about this a million times. They don't even know who Christ is. And again, he wouldn't be born for another 210 years. Okay? So what you want to write down with him, this is the main things from Qin Shi Huangdi. He's the first emperor of China. So they think of this as, if he's the first emperor, Qin Shi Huangdi. China. That's where it comes from. That's where the name comes from. China's first dynasty. He will unify China. So there's this 12-year period where they are like a whole warring states period, and he will be the victor. And you'll see here in the map that I'm going to show you in a second that he will conquer all these. He will do it with like this new technology, the crossbow, and people will rally behind him. Hey, must have the mandate of heaven. He's going to also start building the Great Wall of China. Now, there were sections of the wall that were kind of there already to keep the Mongols out, and that's why they built in the first place, to keep the Mongols out, which you'll see here, and you'll also see when we study Japan and Mongolia. He connects it and builds huge, massive portions of the wall to really keep out the Mongolians.
Wait for it. You are the Mongols.
So I said unification of China. One of the things he's known for. He's the founder, essentially, of modern day China. What we think of China. These are all different dynasties that are all ruling throughout China. The Qin, the Han, the Chu, the Wei, all the Yang, all these different dynasties are all here. The warring states period, right? The state in which states warred. Okay? He's victorious. That's what I was talking about there. And he conquers, I think in like a 12-year period, he conquers that. Qin Shi Huangdi. Other things he's known for is the terracotta army. Now, when he died of mercury poisoning, and ironically, he thought that mercury would cure him. He thought that if he would make him immortal, because he wanted to live forever, and we know you can't live forever, but if you're a megalomaniac and you want to rule forever, and he thought his dynasty would, well, you'll do what your doctors say. And the doctors at the time said, well, master, take these mercury tablets. Yeah, that killed him. It ruined his brain and eventually killed him. He got really sick. But when he died, he wanted to be buried in this kind of secret chamber, this big, huge area, and he, kind of similar to China, wanted to take an army with him. And so what he had is thousands of terracotta warriors, and these terracotta warriors, people believe that they are modeled after actual people, right? And they were, at one point, they were colored and really beautifully, decorated with actually like colors like red and black and green and so forth. But I mean, over 2,000 years of paint decay. It's going to happen once air gets into these chambers. And how they actually found this was on a farm in 1974 by accident. Farmers were kind of doing their thing, and they just kind of stumbled upon these, and they eventually said, hey, we got a big find here. And the Chinese people had known that he was more than likely buried in the area, but they had no idea that he was buried with all these terracotta warriors. And some here they have on like horses, and he took all these different things, not just soldiers, but like basically part of the bureaucracy too, like government workers and weapons, and similar to what it was in Egypt. I actually did get a chance to see this, not in China. This was actually in, I think 2 years ago or so, in Richmond. Sometimes what they'll do is they will ship these out to different areas of the world and say, hey, we got a couple terracotta warriors for you, and we'll put them on your exhibit in one of your museums, and you can see it. Be very, very, very careful with it. I do remember a story like a few years ago, around the same time. There was another one that was also in Philly. A few of these terracotta warriors were in a Philly museum, and a kid like broke off one of the thumbs, I think, and he like wanted a piece of it, I don't really understand what he was thinking. He was a teenager, broke off a piece of it. They caught him, obviously, but at his home he had like in a drawer stuffed in there. China banned him from China ever. Like, he can never ever go to China ever again. Like, it's not even like, oh well, you're just a kid. China's like, no, I don't care, you're banned forever. So, but it was really cool. It was really cool seeing that part of history. He obviously again built the Great Wall of China. Now this is a huge, I've heard different things. You can see it from space, you can't see it from space. Regardless, it's one of the most incredible things you probably have ever seen, right? So here you have this amazing wall stretching over these huge mountains, right? That, not like Himalayan style mountains, but this wouldn't be easy to build, right? And they're keeping out the Mongolians. This is one of the reasons why. At first it was just to block out other warring states, but the Mongolians were such a problem with their horses that they're like, all right, well, we need to make sure we block out them, okay? And that's what I represent in this map up here. You have the Mongolians coming from the northern region here and coming into the southern region. So most of the wall here is right here, okay? It is stretching on the northern half here where the Yellow River is, all the way to the sea, the Yellow Sea here, and it goes right into the sea. Like, they definitely didn't want these Mongolians, going. Now you probably think, well, Mr. Shank, can they just swim around? Yeah, sure. You could just swim around or take some boats, but the Mongolians are known for their horses, right? And you're going to be able to obviously defend that pretty easily if someone's trying to get their horses around there or swim across. They're going to be shooting arrows, throwing whatever they can at them to get the people out, okay? But even on the other side, it's so big, it's thousands of miles here, that it's going through deserts, it's going through seas, it's going through rivers, it's going over mountains. So the length of the Great Wall at the Ming Dynasty, this is all the way in 1368 to 1644 AD, was about 5,500 miles. Not all of it's 100% connected, but if you kind of tally it all up now, that would be around 5,500 miles. The ones that are connected would be around that. So in total, if you don't count the ones that are all connected, it's going to be about 13,170 miles. And they're kind of finding new portions and sections of the wall even to this day. And it sounds like how they don't find, well, some are in thick forest and some are like maybe buried at this point. It's just depends on the area. Okay, so let's talk about China's social order. Social meaning people, right? How do they keep people in line? How does China have this kind of, you think of like this Zen mentality, this peaceful mentality in some ways. How is China very different? How do they maintain their harmony between each other, right? How are there's such a high level of work efficacy and harmony towards other people? How do they get this? You want to write down, this is very important, this is the philosophy of Confucianism, right? This social order. So Confucianism, founder Confucius, aka Confuzi, right? To the Westerners, meaning like the, us, essentially, they just say it as Confucius, but he would be as Confuzi. 551 to 479 BC. And he's going to come up with this because he sees this warring states period where you have a ton of people at war with one another, okay? And he wants to, put an end to it, right? He's like, well, how am I going to do this? How am I going to get the Chinese people to, essentially unify under a common good? So what he does is, the first thing is, it's a philosophy, like a way of living, right? Has more influence to this day. They still practice, many of the Chinese to this day practice this social philosophy. It's not like mandatory, but pretty much you're going to be practicing it in some way, shape, or form. Confucianism is a system of social and ethical philosophy. So what social means, people. Ethical means, like, basically, is it right or wrong? Is it ethically right to do something? Is it like, maybe are you hurting people? Or are you not hurting people? Right? So it's a system he puts in place. Confucius' ideas and teachings were collected in a book called the Analects. Again, obviously, I have it underlined. Write it down. So again, if you want something to survive, write it down. Write it down. And there's a lot. He's not exactly writing this down. He's having his disciples write it down. Whatever, the master said this, and because I've read the majority of the Analects, and that's what it is. It's like a philosophy on life, how to live life accordingly. So he establishes social values in these rituals, these rules. So he saw that these rituals as the root of civilization. I'm going to stress what they are right now. Well, in a second. The wealth and power should not be sought after, but the well-being of others, right? So you shouldn't be in a constant pursuit. I need to get more money, more money, more money. It should be, hey, I'm going to look out for you, right? I'm going to live my life and do what I love to do, but I'm more vested, I'm more interested in helping other people out in the world. He was not widely accepted. Like, when he came up with these ideas, he wasn't widely accepted on it until like 300 years later that they kind of picked this up, right? But here are some of this is Confucius. Write this down. He comes up, this is like summing it up the best we can in the short amount of time that we have on China. 5 basic relationships. So he thought that in order to treat each other well, you need to know how to treat each other well and what the respect level is. So how the ruler should treat the subjects and how the subjects should treat the ruler, meaning like the emperor to the people and the people to the emperor. Father to son, husband to wife, older brother to younger brother, friend to friend. How you should act in every one of these situations, right? You can't, let's say that the father is treating the son terribly, right? Horribly, and the son still cannot treat the father with any disrespect. It doesn't matter, right? There's just mutual respect for one another. And it doesn't matter what the father does or says, the son cannot disrespect the father at all, right? And the same goes for any of these. There has to be this mutual respect at all times, no matter if one person isn't giving it or not, right? The person that's obviously following it is the one that's going to be better off in the end, but all right, this is what he believed, the 5 basic relationships, right? But it all stems from this filial piety, or filial piety. That children should practice this, from a very young age. They should teach them early, right? The sooner you teach them, the more that's going to stick with them throughout their lives. You can't just kind of throw that on whenever you feel like that. It's not just do any good to have an old man in his 70s, 80s learn that. You want to learn it as a young kid, so you carry that with you the rest of your life. What filial piety is, and you want to write this down, it's respect for elders. So in Confucianism, there's these 5 basic relationships, and at the root of it, is respect, but more specifically, respect for your elders. Doesn't matter if they're being an awful elder to you, right? The elders should act appropriately and should have been raised under Confucianist principles, and then they're practicing that. But even if they're not, you're still respecting them. So Confucius believed that humans are essentially good and not bad. That most humans are good, right? The bad ones kind of stick out, but most of us are good. Back to respecting elders. He has a code of harmony. Still used in Chinese society today. A lot of this stuff still is. Emphasis on learning. This is huge, right? So not only you got to respect your elders, But you've got to have your population heavily educated. Society will run better when the people inside of it know what they're talking about, that are well educated, that they're not naive or ignorant to things, that they are heavily educated, right? If America could educate, think of everyone like went to Harvard, like that level of education, every single American. How much different America would look if we were educated to that degree and everyone was a scholar. Yeah, a lot of our problems we wouldn't have, all right? Who knows? We might have flying cars. We might have well past of technology of other countries, right? There's also another thing here, ancestor worship. So if you've ever seen Mulan, it's kind of like that. Like you're worshiping the people before you, like maybe your great-great-grandfather, your great-great-grandmother, or grandmother, or your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great nephew, or something like that, right? There's like these ancestor worship that goes on here. That's Confucianism, right? It's a social philosophy. But there's more than one social philosophy out there. You want to write this one down. This one's called Taoism, also known as Taoism. Sometimes just how you say it. Tao and the D and the T sound similar when it rolls off the tongue. But I'm just going to call it here Taoism just to stick with it, all right? So founder Lao Tzu from 604 to 531, around the same time as Confucianism. This is before Confucianism, but that's okay. The name's perfect, Lao Tzu, because it kind of has, if you hear Lao Tzu, you're like, oh, like lazy, lousy. Yeah, and it kind of is like that, and this is what I mean by it. Taoism is based on the worship of nature. You're worshiping that there's a spirit in like everything, and you're at peace, you're at harmony with all beings that are out there, whether it be a plant or a rock or a person, right? They believe the order of nature is more stable and enduring than any other power, like be like water, right? Kind of going with the flow. I kind of relate them as like ancient hippies, is maybe the best way of describing them. Maybe that'll help you. Taoism teaches that the art of living and surviving is to conform to the natural way of things. This is like what I was talking about with water, right? Be like water, like flow. Like water can crash. Water can take the shape of any cup that it's in. Water can be very strong at times, and it can be very calm at times. And so be like water, my friend. Be like water. The idea of yin and yang is this example, right? And you want to write that down, obviously, as well, because I have these giant check marks there. If you've ever heard of yin and yang, then you're already well on your way. Yin and yang, or yin and yang, when there's a positive, there's a negative. When there's a sun, there's a moon. When there's a light, there's a dark. When there's a heaven, there's an earth. When there's active, there's passive. When there's fire, there's water. When there's above, there's below. When there's heat, there's cold. When there's generation, there is growth. When there's wake, there's a sleep. Okay? So this is like when there's one thing, there's another. Okay? When there's balancing forces in the world. Okay? And this is what the yin and yang symbol is for, right? As you see in this example here. So this is a Taoism symbol. If you see this as well, it's like the main, but even Confucius does use this, but it's not the main symbol for them. But there's another social philosophy as well called legalism. Not as widely used, kind of only for a brief period, but another way of like, living your life. Hey, let's make all people in China live this way. One way is Confucianism, one way is Taoism, and there's no way legalism. All right. Hong Fei is the founder, Hong Fei. 280 to 233 BC. So this is the time of Qin Shi Huangdi. So the main things here is legalism is based on the belief that most people are evil and selfish, right? That's like the opposite of Confucianism, right? Because Confucianism, like, hey, most people are pretty good people. Well, legalism, think of like legal law and like harsh punishments. Basically think like, okay, if I ran a legalist classroom, well, if you spoke out, I would, smack your hand or maybe put you in detention for the rest of your school or, maybe even worse. Law should have clear punishment and clear reward. So, if you do this punishment will happen to you. But if you do it correctly, you'll be rewarded. So maybe you, like if in the classroom I said, raise your hand, and you don't raise your hand, well, maybe you'll get a smack in the head, all right, under the legalism approach. If you are running, but you raise your hand, you raise your hand, and I call on you, and you answer correctly, and I'll give you a piece of candy or something like that. Like clear punishments, clear rewards. Like you know what you'll get if you do it wrong. You'll know what you do if you do it right. Rulers should not give into their, you don't have to write this, but should not give into their feelings or trust anyone, right? And this is why. Qin Shi Huangdi, the emperor, the first emperor of China, he was a megalomaniac. He was kind of crazy. He was burning books. He hated Confucianism. He thought, he made people, he basically enslaved a lot of the people, peasants, and made them build the Great Wall. That wasn't just like, hey, let's just go, I'll do this. We'd love to do it. Like, no. He adopted legalism. People hated it, right? It would be a horrible way to, me personally, I think it's a horrible way to have a country run if you were to a legalist country or a legalist household or a legalist school. So what the Han Dynasty comes after the Qin Dynasty, because after Qin Shi Huangdi dies, his son takes over for a little bit, and then they overthrow him. Remember? Mandate of Heaven. That cycle, dynastic cycle. The Han Dynasty, whoa, let's do what Confucius did here, a few hundred years back. Let's adopt that. That sounds like it's a pretty a smart idea. So let's talk about the Han Dynasty. Han Dynasty, golden age. This is their golden age. From 206 BC to 220 AD. You're probably thinking, well, it's only 14 years. No. It's over 400 years, because look at the time frame. BC runs 206 will run 206 years until the year 0. And then when the year 0 hits, that's when Christ is born, and then it will run another 220 years. Christ, they're not following this time scale. It's just for us to understand that time scale, right? So why are they so golden? Why are they so golden? So Emperor Wu Di, most famous, write this down. Wu Di will be the most famous, and we'll kind of start this and a lot of these golden age projects. Write all of them. So they're going to adopt Confucianism, the Han Dynasty does, right? And it was a smart move, because that's still lasting here in China today, right? Why? And you might think, well, why are Chinese people so hardworking? Why are they very disciplined? Some of it can be traced back to this, right? So they'll open up the trade routes. So Qin Shi Huangdi kind of closed a lot of that in, kind of blocked it up, and they opened it up. The Silk Road, specifically, the Silk Road was huge. Silk Road's a series of routes. I'll show you that here in a moment. But that's going to have interactions with other cultures. And when you have interactions with other cultures, your civilization grows. It's great, right? They introduced a civil service. This is government workers. This will not go away. This imperial bureaucracy that I've told you about, it will not go away. If you have a giant empire, you can't run it by yourself. You can't run it with two buddies. You've got to have a lot of government workers working under you. That's what a civil service is, right? Some of your parents and guardians, so forth, might be working for the civil service right now. Right? And Confucius came up with a civil service test, to see if you were competent enough in order to work, because you don't want just anybody. What was happening was prior dynasties were just, hey, you're a buddy of mine, you're going to be doing this job, even though you have no experience. All right, you have no idea what you're doing, you're going to be doing this job. Confucius was like, well, let's make them take a test so they know what they're doing. Let's make sure they're educated, and then when they're ready, they take a test, and they can maybe have this great job. They'll increase the territory during the Han Dynasty. Paper comes from China. Actual paper, not papyrus, that's Egypt. Silk, right? That fabric can kind of keep you cool in the summertime and keep you warm in the wintertime. And it's really soft, all right? Or really that was a Chinese secret for a long time. Kind of made out of the silkworm, a very long time. Porcelain, like that fine china that you see there. And the compass, northwest, south, east, how do you get places, right? What direction I need to go? They also spread Buddhism, Mahayana Buddhism. So not only do they have this mixture of the social order Confucianism, but now they have this really peaceful religion, if you remember, from India coming in. And they're like, okay, well, let's just combine these two. These are great. And China was prospering for a long, long time because of this, for over 400 years. That's porcelain. Maybe I just know my parents have these, they're called a china closet. And what it is you have your the more expensive, well-made dishes, elaborate dishes like this, and you do it for Thanksgiving or Christmas or a special holiday and event. You only bring them out during that time. They're not as popular as they used to be. Maybe your parents have this, but they're called fine china or just called china, literally just called china. But it's just porcelain. Okay, maybe you have a porcelain toilet if you're lucky enough, right? When I was talking about the Silk Road, this is what I was referring to. So China, that red road that you see running through there, it's connected all the way into Mesopotamia. You're talking thousands of miles, but they kept adding to it, going up into Mongolia, going up into Europe, and all these different places. So these routes connected the world. Like the Silk Road was like the internet connection of its day, because people didn't obviously have internet, but they're able to talk and exchange ideas and culture through actually physically going and being in these places and talking to these people. So the Silk Road was not made of silk. To be very clear here, it's not made of silk, but they did trade lots of silk on it and other products. All right, but that has been Shankism episode 7, and I will see you next time when we talk about Mongolia and Japan.